invite you if there's anything you want to say, Lyn. And I'm very aware that 3 years ago, almost October 2017, a lot of the people in this room were gathered under Lyn's aegis with the Burdekin Water Futures Group, looking at very much these issues. And I think this is really a question about how can we move this forward effectively and efficiently. What can we do to help? So, far away.
I probably don't need a microphone. So that one of the reasons the Burdekin Water Futures was started was because there were lots of people in our area when I was first elected mayor talking about water. And I remember I used to see Keith at every single meeting, and I'd say, which group is this? What are we doing? So then we looked to establish the Burdekin Water Futures, which encompass providers, government, users, and it took a while before everyone started to trust each other. However, it's come a long way since 2006. Wasn't it, Keith, we started? Around 2006. And everyone in that group will agree we keep talking about the same issues, and a lot of it revolves around government policy and how do we as a united group of users, providers, science, how do we use that to make change for our environment for the better? Now my role is purely the facilitator. I chair it and rely on everyone else in the group with all the knowledge and with all the practicalities to try to see what is the way forward. And that's always a challenge, and I'll just use one example. So we heard about the sediment, the fine sediment that leaves the Burdekin River. One of the big issues we have is when there's a flood, there are thousands of tonnes of fine sediment because the environmental policies won't allow the River Trust to maintain the river banks because a lot of that sediment is just washing away. So we've had a change in policy on one side, because they don't want hard fixing of the rivers, they don't want rocks and they don't want those kind of improvements. However, that then affects the amount of sediment that washes away. And how do you get the two together? So all the concerns, and I saw the photos of the sediment over the corals, but if we could stop the riverbanks running away, in dealing with those issues, that has to help. There's all the little steps, and I don't think we'll ever find one big solution. What are the little steps we take to make the environment a better place, which then leads to the economy being in a better spot? And I don't have any answers. My job's here to help the people who do.
Thank you, Lyn. And Lyn is I think you're in your 5th term, aren't you? Fourth. So there's a great deal of experience there. Perhaps I might invite Sonia Bennetto just to say a few words as Deputy Mayor of Charters Towers, and whether you have any questions to direct to the panel at the end of that.
Thank you, Alistair. As Lyn has said, it's policy is implemented in fragmentation. There's no overarching objective when it comes to our sustainability of our water catchment. And this is obviously a historical issue that we continue to deal with. From our perspective, and looking at the economic viability of having water security for a region like ours where we're trying to develop our agricultural industry, we had some words there from Roy previously in relations to the Hellscape Dam project. Now, stage 1 of that is obviously Big Rocks Weir, which has received federal support with $30 million of funding allocated towards developing that infrastructure. I refer back to what Nathan said earlier about integrated catchment management. I think there's got to be 4 key links into that integrated catchment management. One is the land management, as we talked about, with producers and landholders managing their own courses that link into the Burdekin water catchment. The second one is obviously managing the sediment runoff, and Lyn touched on the history of that as well and the ongoing ramifications of that we need to deal with. Scientific backing and support absolutely needs to dovetail into it, but I also think the strategic infrastructure how can we use these projects like Big Roxby, which will be a critical economic factor, but also one that shines a spotlight on how do we manage these water catchments for the greater good. Unless there is government money thrown towards things like infrastructure projects, there is no real consistent approach to observing and monitoring our water quality and ensuring long-term sustainability for those ecosystems along that catchment. So in my view, strategic infrastructure does have a significant role to play when it comes to managing our catchments, because it helps us to look at the greater picture in the long term.
Thank you. Any question you want to throw to the panel? Okay. Does anybody want to raise? Oh, thank
I've
you.
got a question.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't ask me, did I?
Yeah.
So, back to the Burdekin, Lower Burdekin. So our main economy is agriculture. How do you find the balance between the science and the livability and the economy to sustain all of the products? It's a great contributor to the Queensland and Australian economy. So with any consideration of science, policy, you need to find the balance for economy and livelihood. We're living in a society where there are less and less people willing to work. And if we make it too difficult for people to work, then we lose the ability to produce food. And I think in COVID, it's been very obvious that Australia needs to provide more of their own resources. And the best place in Australia is the Burdekin to provide food. So let's never forget that it's the livelihood of that whole district, which then feeds into Townsville and feeds into the region, but that is our critical economic driver. And I'd be happy to hear any comments on that.
Keith?
Yeah, speaking as a farmer, growing stuff isn't the hard bit, despite cyclones and pests and all the myriad things that try and stop you doing it. It's making money from it, it's selling it at the end. And so there we've got the Burdekin, this wonderful irrigation area, growing grass, growing sugarcane. And John Kirsch, I was talking to earlier, he sold up cattle place out of Richmond, went to Garoo, bought a cane place, trying to get out of it because you can't make any money out of it. But people have to maintain that resource and run it. Farmers, there's a lifestyle aspect of farming, but the ability to make money, that's up to the individual personal choice and opportunities. So the point that was made by Roy about more land, more avocados, more chilies, like I'm sure the McShanes up at Dalbeck would be really heartened to hear that there was going to be 50,000 hectares of capsicum grown. That's going to do wonders for their bottom line. So it's the entirety of it, it's the choice of the individuals, it's not locking them into systems and not oversupplying the resource that enables people to get locked into a cycle of production where they can't get off it. So I think the point that was made by Irene, is it? Sorry, from Sonia, sorry. You said a number of times managing the resource, and that's the key. We don't fix environmental problems. We don't go out there and fix a feral pig problem by killing 100,000 feral pigs in a year, and then next year they come back again. We don't fix a problem by this Greening Australia project that Nathan described, by spending a lot of money for 3 years and then walking away from it. We manage our environment, we have a responsibility to manage that environment. The people who manage the environment are the people who live here. It's the farmers who understand their landscapes, and you need regulation, you need playing fields and goalposts, all the rest of it, but you need that local knowledge and understanding and commitment, which comes, the coordination of it, I think, from NQ Dry Tropics down this way and Terrain up our way. Not a statutory body telling people what to do, but an organisation that represents the entirety of the landscape, the conservation elements, the production landscapes, the traditional land communities, the farmers, the people who live here. So I had that figure of $5.4 billion for this new water project. Well, there's $5 billion already sitting in the North Australia Infrastructure Fund, and they've managed to spend $2 billion over the last 5 years. Imagine if that money went into maintaining our green infrastructure, maintaining the very natural resources that enable all of our economies and industries to flourish. Without a well-managed natural resource, you don't have the ability to farm, you don't have tourism, you don't have people flying, well, when they can, around the world to visit the Great Barrier Reef. So it's management is the first thing. We've got to recognise we don't fix the environment, we manage it. And the second is that management is done by the people who live in the community and who understand it, not imposed externally. And that fixes the real challenge to Northern Australia, which is a lack of a diversified environment or economic opportunities for people. At the moment, people are locked into mining or sugarcane, or people working in the university sector or the health sector, but it's a quite narrow economic base in Northern Australia. We have 5% of the population in 50% of the Australia that's Northern Australia. We don't have a big workforce to manage it. So there's real jobs and opportunities in environmental management that could happen tomorrow, but it's an attitudinal change, and that's the hardest change to make.